Good evening and welcome to the Ombudsman program. My name is Diane Wellborn. I am the Ombudsman and I'm going to be your host for this evening's program. I'm very pleased to bring to you tonight two representatives from the Dayton Board of Education who are going to answer our questions and give us some updated information. They are both relatively new members, but I'll come back to that after introductions. I have with me tonight Reverend Dr. William E. Harris, Jr., who has recently been elected the president of the Dayton Board of Education, so congratulations on that.
Thank you so much, Diane.
I also have with me board member Mr. Mohamed Hamdani. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Good,
Thank
good.
you.
Who is a recently elected member of the Dayton Board of Education. So I do want to begin by thanking both of you for your service and in running for office and being elected and serving on this board is not something that you had to do. It's a choice that you made. You both have complete full-time jobs and full lives already. So I think our community is very grateful for people who give that service. So we thank you, and we're looking forward to supporting you in that service on the board in our community. So I would, because it is a decision that that people make with their family and with their communities that they live in, I'd like to give each of you a chance to talk a little bit about what led you to do this. How long have you been pondering this decision? Who encouraged you? Who helped you with this? And just let our viewers know a little bit more about how one made that decision for this type of public service. I'll begin with you, Reverend Dr. Harris.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have been in this community now for over 25 years, and two of my sons are graduates of Dayton Public Schools. They had quite an experience, a wonderful experience with Dayton Public Schools. But however, I have watched the ups and downs for these 25 years. I have seen challenges. I have been somewhat dismayed about, we see test scores go down. We see the school system has been in academic emergency off and on. And so I made a decision where I said, let's see what I can bring to the table. I kind of have a policy where I suggest that if you're going to complain, then you have to get involved. Don't complain if you're not willing to get involved and try to bring solutions to the process. So I made a conscious decision after talking with my family and community of faith, of which I pastor, and really intently thinking about the possibility of serving in this capacity. So I made that decision that I said yes, that I can no longer stand back and not be a part of that solution.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate knowing about that. Was this a decision long in coming? Have you been thinking about this for more than a year or 6 months? How long did it take?
Probably about a good month and a half.
Okay, that's good.
About a good month and a half.
Because your term is for several years.
Sure.
You have 4 years to be doing this.
Yes,
both of you
4
do.
years.
So,
yeah.
okay, and it is a considerable amount of time
That's
to
right.
be in meetings and to do the
Yes.
prep work before you get there. So
Right,
we're
absolutely.
grateful to
Thank
you for
you.
that.
Thank you.
Would you like to share with us your
Sure, yeah.
decision making?
I think one of the things that I noticed about the district is we hadn't had an elected board member that went to Dayton Public Schools in a long time. I think the last member must have been Joey. I think Commissioner Joey Williams was the last Dayton Public School graduate to be on the board. And I felt that that was a voice that was missing. And so I'm a product of Dayton Public Schools. I went to Miami Chapel, Fairview Middle, Colonel White High School. And I do remember the days where, the school was doing really well for a long time. We've always had the same challenges. We're an urban school district, so that always comes with a set of challenges that other school districts don't have to deal with. But there was for a long time, at least when I went there was a sense of community, a sense of family that I felt those voices have left us, and I decided to run because I wanted those voices to come back, and I thought I can bring some of that back to our schools district. Made that decision with the family, friends who have been pushing me to run for a long time. it was I decided not to run about 6 years ago, and so this time I was like, okay, I think I'm ready. You know, my son Adam was turning 3 and Zechariah was turning 1, so I thought it would be the best time for me to do that.
Very good.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for sharing that,
Thank
and I
you.
appreciate that very much. I'd also like to give our viewers, before we get into all the many questions that we have, I think that sometimes the procedure of some of our operations of government is not always
Sure.
explained or readily or even easily understood. So I'd kind of like to ask you to take some minutes to just talk about the operations of the board as you understand. I realize you're brand new, there's more to learn, but many people do not recognize how the agenda is set up and what's in the agenda, what's coming for the board for discussion, what's the procedure that the board is going to go through in making those decisions. Don't often understand when is a citizen's time to speak
Sure.
and what are their limits,
Yeah,
because
sure.
you know it has to happen. And then what is an executive session? I think I've asked too many, but I'll just
That's a lot of questions. Let me write them down.
I've got them here. I'll come
Sure,
come back to them.
Sure.
So let's just start with an overview of why the board does its business in the way that we see when we either visit or when we're watching on Dayton Public TV.
Well, let me say that the board operates as a public entity. And so we have open meetings except for executive session where we discuss various matters in executive session that are closed. But other than that, we have open meetings because it's a public entity, not just a board, but public education. And so because of the Ohio Sunshine Law, we are required to have open meetings where the public is invited, the media is invited, and citizens can come and sit down and see how we operate. One of the things that I do as a board president is to meet periodically, probably every week, with the superintendent. Week before, we have business sessions and review sessions where we sit down and look at the agenda for the meeting. And in most cases, the agenda follows. We have contracts that we have to go over. We have superintendent recommendations for staffing and other matters to discuss on the agenda. We have an opportunity for the public to express themselves over issues and concerns that they have. And then we have, sometimes we're mandated to, we have presentations as well. And we like to honor our students and let the public know that what Dayton Public is doing and to highlight those career opportunities and wonderful opportunities. We have excellent instructors and students that are excited about what they do. For example, just this past Saturday, we had the science fair, and it was wonderful. I met some brilliant young people, and so those are the kind of things that we do at the board meetings.
Additionally, we have different kind of board meetings too, and folks don't realize. I think everybody thinks that every board meeting is a business meeting. For example, tomorrow our meeting is really a planning meeting, where the superintendent and our treasurer and other folks are going to come before the board to inform us of what's going on and let the public know this is what the board is going to be voting on the next time they meet. And so folks show up thinking we're going to be voting on the issues, when in reality we're just there to discuss it. And it's hard for folks to realize that. The agenda is released where, it'll say it's a planning meeting. Folks still show up and think that it's time for discussion, and they don't realize that, there are actually specific times when we will vote, and those are during business meetings, for example. And then we also have various committees meetings as well, and that folks can still come to. But those folks, committees don't make decisions. I mean, they make recommendations to the board, and people don't realize that either. And so they'll show up to a committee meeting thinking sometimes that it's an actual board meeting, and they'll file a complaint to the committee, and the committee members are looking like, well, we don't make those decisions, right? There's a lot of confusion. A lot of it is because it's a democratic form of government. It is highly prescribed by the ORC, Ohio Revised Code. You asked about executive sessions. That was one of your questions. Believe it or not, we can only go into executive sessions for 7 reasons, and they're spelled out in the board policy and the ORC.
And most of those have to do with employment matters.
Employment matters,
For
the most,
contracts,
yes.
Property,
property,
acquisition, or
attorney-client privilege
Yes.
information. Anytime, and those things tend to be private, no matter what the organization is, and
Sure.
so whether it's public or private. And when and I know folks get upset that we go into executive sessions, but what's discussed in executive session is an executive session for a reason. And we can't come out of the executive session and tell everybody what's going on in executive session just because it violates a lot of different rules
I
at
think
that
it's
point.
also important for people to realize that votes aren't taken in
No.
Right,
executive
right.
session. So let's
we just have dialogue,
Right.
and it's important for us to hear from each other. We have 7 members on the board, and that's an opportunity for various members to share their concerns and get it right, to get clarification on certain issues. And so we do that in executive session. But there is no voting in executive session. We come out of executive session. If we have a resolution, that's when we vote, and that's always public.
Right, exactly. Is there anything else you'd like to add about the operations of the board or the citizen comment time, for example? Or-
We have the citizen comment time during business meetings. Citizens are given 3 minutes to speak. They fill out a form. As long as they fill out the form with their name and their address, and they're given 3 minutes to speak. I will say a lot of folks think that the citizens' time sometimes is a time for them to go back and forth with the committee. In reality, it's really there just for us to listen. And it's hard for us to respond because when you're coming up to speak to the board, most of the time, this is the first time we've heard about your
Right,
issue.
right.
And so until we do our study, until we know what you're talking about, we're not going to say, oh, yeah, we got the answer for you. And
It's
I think
not an opportunity for dialogue.
dialogue.
No,
It really
Okay.
isn't.
It's
Yeah,
not.
I think that's also not well understood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will come back to that, but we have a caller that is
Okay.
interested in asking a question.
Sure.
All right, you're on the air. We'd like to hear your question.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this program. It's very encouraging to see these new representatives of the school board, to see Reverend Dr. Harris and to see Mr. Hamdani, how connected and articulate they are and the fresh perspectives that they bring to our school board. The question that I have as a resident of West Dayton has to do with the resources that are directed to schools and the commitment to equity in the public school system. I realize this question may be somewhat out of sequence with your interview, and if you address the question later, that's fine with me because I'll be watching. But I'm just concerned with what's happening to our neighborhood in West Dayton with the closure of Good Samaritan Hospital and with the flight of population and resources.
That's right.
We have such committed people in our neighborhood. We have a number of children, and with that strong aspirations to go to college. And so I'm just concerned about the vision for schools, public schools in West Dayton. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you so
you
much.
for your question and for your compliment of our guest tonight. Thank you. All right, which one of you would like to take that
Oh, wow.
first?
You want to
Well-
start there? I mean, can I highlight something?
You can start.
We're both West Side
Yes,
residents.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And people don't know that. We both live on the west side of Dayton. And people have looked up our addresses. But you want to start?
I'll say this. As a resident of the West Side, I'm very much concerned as well about what's taking place on the west side of Dayton, and frankly the whole city. We do have some major challenges. I think one of the things that we're trying to do as a district is we're using that term right sizing. And right sizing has to do with looking at our resources, looking at the capacity of our buildings, and trying to see what we can do best to continue the education process so that our young people can achieve. And so right sizing has to do with putting adequate resources in the right place to make this process work in terms of educating, giving our young people the opportunity to have everything that everybody else has around the city. We want to make sure that our young people have the same resources, benefits, access to information that everybody else has. So we're looking at that process, and I'm sure Mohamed will talk more about that right sizing piece from the task force. But you know, we have some great challenges. As we talked about population a few minutes ago, that's a critical point in terms of how many kids do we have that are going to our schools. And unfortunately, we do have some deficits in terms of numbers as it relates to our school buildings, because we have a lot of choices today that we didn't have in the past. But today we have, parents have choices that they can make, and they're making those choices.
And I think the best thing we can do for the west side of Dayton, being honest with you, you know, as a student who went to school on the west side of Dayton, I'm a Colonel White graduate, is to make sure that every school that we have on the west side of Dayton is a quality school. That is one of the things that will get us back to where we need to be, not just on the west side of Dayton, but the whole city. You know, the city of Dayton is making a small comeback. You know, manufacturing is making a comeback. You see it downtown. I mean, I work downtown. You see buildings going up. The last piece that I think we have to work on is making sure that our education system works for everybody, and that it's equitable no matter where students go, and that our resources are put in places, not in just some schools, but in all schools. So one of the issues we're having is we have 9 buildings today. Actually, we're now 8 buildings, because I think one of our schools have caught up. You know, I think one of our
more attendance.
more attendance. It's not attendance. Actually, more folks have. You are seeing, I think, you know, with the failure of ECOT and other charter problems, that you are seeing parents really thinking about, you know, Dayton Public School as being a choice, a good choice for their kids. And one of our schools, which we'll talk about later, went from 48% attendance rate up to 53% in the last 2 months. And so you are seeing that, and we would love to see that happen all over again, right? There was a time in Dayton where all 20,000 kids that lived in Dayton went to Dayton Public Schools. That time is no longer around. Today, the district is you know, roughly about 13,500 kids. And if trends continue the way they are, you know, we'll be at close to 11,000 kids by 2026.
And this is a population
Yes,
shift.
it
It's a population shift. Look, everybody, the state of Ohio is getting older.
Yes,
And we're losing population. And the folks that are moving here, back, you know, Dayton is gaining population, but the folks moving into Dayton are not of childbearing age, and they're not moving their kids with them. And so the folks that are moving to downtown Dayton are mostly retirement age, and so they don't have kids going to DPS. Now, it's great for the values of those you know, properties, and it does help the district, but it doesn't bring the kids back that we really need. We're also losing kids right now to charter schools. You know, charter schools is something that we deal with on a regular basis. And we lose kids to voucher programs, and we lose kids to open enrollment. This is something new in Ohio. You know, we actually lose kids to other public school systems. There are other public school systems who are neighboring to us that parents, you know, sometimes choose to go there. And so, even if we targeted all those kids, you know, the likelihood of us getting them all back is it's tough, considering the amount of competitiveness. So one thing I think we can all agree on is the current system as it is in Ohio is obviously not working. So we have been big voices about how do we not just make sure that it's equitable for the kids in Dayton, but for everybody. And we have created a system where unknowingly people are rooting for failure of children. And I say that, and it breaks my heart, because we have created a system where education has become a competition. And we're all competing for bodies, you know, because we get funded based on how many kids attend our schools. And so charter schools are, you know, essentially rooting for us to fail, so the kids will go to them. And sometimes we're rooting for charter schools to fail, so their kids will come to us. But when we do that, we're rooting for kids to fail. And there has to be better models out there. There are better models out there, and I think that's where we have to start working towards.
All right, that's a big
Sorry
issue
to-
to change.
yeah, it is a big
no,
issue.
it is a big issue
It
to
is,
change
it is.
because there's so much choice
Yes.
There
that
is,
parents
there is,
have. That
yes.
one way, of course, is to have the academics be
Oh,
so
yeah.
attractive
Yes.
that people choose
Yes.
to come
Yes.
back.
Yes.
But there are other strategies I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah,
you're going to be putting into play. I think we'll probably come back to this a little bit more with
Sure,
the
okay.
task force work, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about, you all have come to the table at a time when the superintendent has left the district, and so now we have an acting superintendent.
Sure.
And what can you say about that process to go forward?
Well, we have an acting superintendent. Dr. Elizabeth Lawley is currently our acting superintendent. And at this point, it's ironic that we meet tonight, which is Monday night. Tomorrow night, we will go into executive session and we will be discussing that position. So
Okay.
at this point, I'm unable to
You
say,
haven't had the
right,
conversation
we haven't
yet.
had the
Okay.
conversation
Okay.
just
And this
yet.
is another one of those quirks about
Right.
the board, right?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
until we meet to talk about it, it's
Yeah.
not like we call each other and talk about this
Right,
stuff. you know, it's
exactly.
because we have
That's
to do it all
in public.
in
Yes.
public. And
Right.
so
Yes.
until we
Right.
meet, really, we actually haven't had a meeting
Right.
since we voted on the last resolution we had on the superintendent.
Right.
Yeah.
So tomorrow night,
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
upcoming then in
Yeah.
executive
Yeah.
session for that, which you
Yes.
will.
And that will give us a chance to really flush out, you know, what direction we want to take
Okay.
in terms of the superintendent position.
All right, and so back to the operations of the board, the agendas for all the board meetings are announced on your website,
Yes.
right?
Correct.
Within
Yes.
like, what is it, 48 hours?
48 hours.
Before the
Yes.
boards actually meet. So
Right.
anybody can go there and
Sure.
see the agenda that you and the superintendent
Right.
have created in advance of the board meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
they may.
And
Just
there-
to remind people,
right.
they can find
Sure. They can
this.
find
Yeah,
it.
they can
It's
find it.
out there, it's on the
Yeah,
web,
it
so.
is.
There are reasons at times where we add things last minute.
Of course.
Contract negotiations are the things that always people, you know, that sometimes get added last minute. You know, we always like to celebrate our agreements with our bargaining units.
Yes.
And we want to approve those as fast as possible.
Right.
Because we're, you know, negotiations oftentimes takes a long time.
Yes.
And so those are the pieces that sometimes get added, you know, late in the game, you know, maybe, and that's because you want to vote on those right away because, you know, now that you have an
can't
agreement,
wait.
you can't
Right.
wait. You know,
Right.
we want to make sure our bus drivers
Yes.
have an agreement.
Right.
We want to make sure our teachers have the agreement. So yeah, you know, at time, as soon as those are approved, we approve those.
Those are going to go forward
forward.
and get
Yep.
accepted into your agenda. So
Right.
that's great. Let's return then to the community task force,
Sure.
which we've heard a little bit about, and I guess I should say that the meeting that was held is also available on the web for anybody to
Sure.
watch.
Yes.
You
That's
can
right.
you can watch that all. What is it? 2 hours and 15 minutes of it, or something
2
like
hours and
that.
15
minutes
It
was the
was
first
it
one.
was quite
Yes.
a process then
Yes.
with complete with dot exercises
Yes,
and
yes,
prioritizations
yes,
and
yes,
all of that.
yes. Right.
So why don't you talk about the notion, the idea to develop this task force? What lay behind the creation?
You know, I think some of it is, you
Which
know,
you are co-chairing.
I am
should
co-chairing
say.
and the Reverend
Yes.
is on
Yes,
as well
with-
as a member.
with Commissioner
Jeff
Jeff
Mims.
Mims with the
Yes,
city
yes.
of Dayton, formerly
Yeah,
Dayton Public
you know,
Schools.
one of the things that we heard about as we were campaigning the most is that we don't have enough input from business and community leaders. We really, that's one of the biggest thing we heard about. You know, how come business left DPS? How come they're not involved as much as they used to be?
We are going to come back to that, but we have another caller.
All right,
So
all
we
right.
need to
Well, let's get
into-
that caller.
Okay, we're going to do
All right.
All right, caller, you're on the air, and we'd love to hear your question.
Yes, hi. I don't have any children in Dayton Public Schools, but I'm very community-minded and work in Dayton. And I'm wondering if at some time during the program you might be able to give some ideas of what people can do to be supportive of the schools. Things, maybe your website, or maybe there's some suggestions you can give, because I do believe that strong schools make for a strong community. So
That's right.
any thoughts you might have on that, I would be interested in hearing. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We appreciate that, and I'm sure that these gentlemen want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
That's a great question.
Do you want to, let's
Can-
answer
can
it
I-
now. Please,
yeah, sure.
please.
During our campaign, that was one of the critical elements, because you knock on doors and some citizens say, well, I don't have any children. in Dayton Public, or children at that age, they're going to
grown
school.
up.
Right, they're grown. And so how can I help, or why should I even care? Well, it's critical because we know that the way the school system goes is the way the community goes. And so it's critical to have citizens that are concerned about the educational process. And when we are concerned about the educational process, we can support it in so many different ways. You can volunteer at buildings. You can go in and read to our children. You know, we're concerned about that third grade level of reading, and it's critical that our kids pass that. And so you can meet with individuals in the building, and you can volunteer. You can assist in the classroom or lunch periods. You can walk the halls. You can go on trips and be an advisor. I mean, it's just so many different ways. Financially, you can assist, and you may find some buildings need something that you can bring to that process to help it. It's just a number of ways that
Right.
our citizens can support us, and we appreciate, because we get support on a continual basis in a variety of ways.
And I will say, don't forget that you can also support the foundation that supports us. You know, Dayton Foundation.
Dayton Public
Yes.
School
Yes.
Foundation.
Yes.
That's a big piece of what we do. They support a lot of our programs, whether it's arts and stivers or bringing bands back, and they do a lot of fundraising for our student senate and athletes out there. And so that's a great way piece. And mentoring programs for our children.
Absolutely.
If you own a business, we'd love to have you come and create internships for our kids as well. And if you've ever wanted to sponsor one of our schools, we'd love to have you talk to us about that.
So the way to make this happen is to visit the school and speak to the principal.
That's right.
Call
Sure.
and make an appointment with the
Yes.
principal.
Yes.
Right.
All right, we have another caller.
Oh,
I'm sure there's
nice.
some more ways that you want to say.
Sure.
Yes, you're on the air, so we'd like to hear your question. Go ahead, please. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. I am a resident of Dayton and attended Dayton Public Schools and grew up in Dayton all of my life. And one of the things that I was listening to is that there was a school that you mentioned that had a 48%, attendance, and it boosted from 48% to 53%, I think you had mentioned.
Yes.
And I was just curious as to what was done, what was put in place to boost the attendance of that school. And then my second question is, I thought I heard Dr. Harris mention something about the Sunshine Law. Can you tell me what that is?
Okay. Thank you very much for those very good questions. We appreciate them. All right,
welcome.
let's start with the change in the school building from 48% up to 53%.
Right.
Enrollment.
Enrollment, not
is-
attendance.
Yes.
Attendance is different, right?
Yeah, so
Right.
let's explain the difference. The attendance is the daily
attendance
of
rate.
each
Yes.
individual
Individual
child.
student, right.
But this is an enrollment rate
Enrollment
for
is
the
the
whole
number of
population.
students that you have, right? So when we're talking about 48 versus 53, we're talking about the capacity of students that we can hold in that building. You know, so when we're saying we're at 52% or 50% capacity, that means the school is really only half full. If we're below 50, it's, a school that's, less than 50%. It's tough to run a school district when you have 9 buildings below 50% because of funding issues that come with that. But, we're really focused on providing quality education, and I think that's where it starts for all our parents. And what you see in some of the buildings that you're seeing a resurgence is a focus inside the schools on making sure that it serves the community and that they have the right programs for the children and the parents. And once parents see results, their kids will come back. And I think that's what the focus is.
And in this particular school, is there anything that you would like in particular that you'd like to cite that might
Sure, I
have?
think we're looking at
that-
Westwood Elementary,
That might
right?
have
Yeah,
been
yeah.
a reason for the change, or are parents asked why?
One of the
and-
biggest things at Westwood, I think, is parent involvement.
Yes.
All right.
Parental involvement is key to a child's education. It is, in fact, the number one predictor of child success. And it goes, guardianship, and if you can be involved in the child's life, you will see a great improvement. And so the community realized, once we put the information out there that the school is under-enrolled, the community realized that there's this resource out there that they haven't been using. And there's a lot of great resources around that Westwood, right? I mean, we have the Wesley Center that's been highly involved with us out there. Dakota Center has been highly involved with us out there. They have a couple of local sponsors. I know they've got recent sponsorship from CareSource as well, and as well as other organizations to help with different programs. And so when you do that, you create a sense of community inside that school, and word of mouth is the best thing that can happen to our district. Because parents talking to other parents, telling them how great a school is better than any marketing that we can do on our own. You know, I can do a million commercials, but a parent calling other parents saying, no, my kid really likes this school, and my kid likes DPS. That's where it starts for us.
All right, very good.
I think so critical is the leadership.
That's right.
The principles and the vision that they have and the creativity that the instructors have, that lends itself to academic excellence. And once parents see that, they send their children to.
They send their kids.
Yes, absolutely.
Very good. And the second question the caller had was about the Sunshine Law. Very important thing for people to understand, because it actually dominates and rules the way you all act as a board. So which one of you wants to take that?
Well, that's the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio deems that, and we're not the only state that has the Sunshine Law.
Right.
Many of the states do.
Correct.
The Sunshine Law simply says that when you are a public entity, that the public has access to the way you operate. And so it's mandated by the state that we have public meetings. And so this is under the Sunshine Law. For example, Mohamed and 4 of us can't sit in the same location and talk business.
Yeah, because it's a quorum, right? Anytime we have a quorum of our public body, then it's a public meeting. And
So you're not in restaurants together?
No, we're not.
Because of the Sunshine Law.
It's not that I don't like Mo.
We understand.
And if we go to basketball games, we're always sitting on opposite ends, rooting for different teams. You know, so you don't want to give the perception that we're having meetings out there with a quorum. But you know, the Sunshine Law is really, a public body has to have public meetings and be open to the public.
And so I guess we should also add for the caller that this doesn't just regulate the operations of Dayton Public School Board, but of all of our boards and commissions in general, and kind of even goes further to give the public access to make public information requests.
Yes. Records
about
requests.
Records requests.
absolutely.
So
That's correct.
it's actually quite extensive, and is there's a lot of information about that at the Attorney General's website. That's kind of in his office. But thank you for that very good question. We need to highlight these things. We were starting a little bit down the road of the task force.
Sure.
We had those
Where
great.
were we?
We had those great questions.
Yes, where were we?
We'll get you back. So
Okay.
the idea of having a task force came in response to comments that we don't have some people involved with the school district anymore.
Right. I mean, and let's. I mean, the timeline is important here, right? I think the announcement by the former board about the under-enrollment happened in December of last year, and with the new board coming in, it was key, I think, for us to kind of make sure we hear all the voices. Let me highlight something else that a lot of people, I think, don't understand. That it's not just a task force, right? We have actual other meetings so we are actually having meetings in every one of those buildings for the parents of those buildings to give input. And then we have community sessions as well. And so we have 2 open community sessions where the community will have input. The thought process was, can we get 3 or 4 different opinions from different groups so the board can make an informed decision? We wanted to hear back from the parents of the schools that were on the list. And then we wanted to hear from the community at large. But we also wanted a non-biased almost opinion from the business community that can look at data alone. Just here's the data, what do you recommend? Because it was up to me and up to Reverend Harris, we wouldn't be going through this process right now. We love those kids and we love our teachers, and we want to make sure every kid gets a quality education. But we have to go through this process to make sure that they get there. And so that's really, I want to highlight that. The fact is, the board still makes a decision.
Yeah.
People don't realize that. They think the task force is making a decision. They're not.
They will make a recommendation or a
And
set
it-
of recommendations
well,
to the board?
No, actually, they'll make a set of recommendations to the superintendent.
Okay.
Who will then decide whether those recommendations are good or bad, right? And then she can take those recommendations and then she'll put them in front of the board. They're not even making a set of recommendations to the board at all.
Okay.
Because the superintendent, the superintendent at the end is going to be working with us and say, these are our options and this is the data. And sometimes in late April, we'll be looking at all this information. We'll have to make some choices at that point. Let me also highlight, no decision has been made, because I think we get a lot of people who call you or me and stop us on the street saying, I heard you're going to do this and this and this. I'm like, well, that's the first time I've heard of it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and some of that is because unfortunately, sometimes, and I hate to blame the media, I think one newspaper published that we were going to be closing 9 schools, for example, which is not the case. That was never an option for anybody. Unfortunately, they put that in writing, and it created that sense of anxiety in our neighborhoods, in our community, and that misinformation is still out there. So I'm going to be first to correct that. We are not closing 9 schools on west side of Dayton. That is not happening. We have 9 schools that are under-enrolled in West Dayton.
Okay.
And we're looking at all options, including ways to hopefully increase enrollment. That's on the table as well, and we're working very hard with that. So the idea of the task force, to go back to the original question, is really to get a separate voice, a voice from key community leaders and business leaders that will give us what we hope to be an unbiased, because being honest with you, I'm biased and he's biased because we both live in West Dayton, right? And a lot of our board members are biased as well because they're parents and they have their kids that go there as well. And then, the parents from the schools are going to be biased towards their own school. Every one of those parents are going to want to protect, their own schools, and I understand that. And then the community at large, as you heard earlier, are really invested in our schools. But I will tell you the one thing I have noticed, Mr. President and Diane, I have never seen engagement at DPS as high as I have seen it over the last few months.
Wow.
And I will say some of that has to do with the fact that I think our community is ready to get behind DPS and make the right choices to move us forward. So
We
there's
certainly hope so.
Well, I hope so too. Sorry, I hope I answered your question. So.
Yes, you did. I believe that you did. I think that I'd like to try to remember when the opportunities for public comment are going to be. Is that February 20th and 26th?
That's
or
correct.
something?
20th and 26th. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right. I wanted to get that out there for any of
Okay.
our viewers who
Right.
want to listen into that. And that'll take place down at the Dayton Board of Education.
Actually, I think one of them is at Meadowdale.
Okay.
And I can't remember. It's escaping me. I think it's somewhere
it
in
will
my mind.
be. It will be published on
It
the
is
website.
published on
but
our
they are
website.
this
Yeah.
month, and
Right.
they're coming up relatively quickly.
Sure.
I mean,
They are.
we're already at the 12th. Okay.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, there's a parent meeting this evening
At Valerie.
at Valerie.
All right.
So
As well.
where parents can come and
Valerie students, right?
So you're moving ahead on all
Sure,
those school
sure.
school meetings are already,
Yeah.
are already
Yeah.
happening.
it's
Yeah.
critical for us to hear from our community,
Sure.
especially our parents.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And the parents of those children that go to those
Yes.
schools have a right to have their voice heard, and we're having a meeting in every one of those schools.
Okay, well,
Yep.
very good. I'm glad to hear about that. Let's talk a little bit then about some of the background that brought us to this
Sure.
situation,
sure.
because it's it is broad, and it has to do with population shifts and
Sure.
changes. And so I'm going to let you all just kind of give us, how did we get here? I'm not sure a lot of people know how we got here.
Well, that's a tough question. There was a
Sorry.
time.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
it's going back in history, right? I mean, there was a time when every kid that lived in Dayton either went to Dayton Public Schools or a private school, if they can afford it. And for the majority of people, that was the only choice.
Right.
And then somewhere in 1998, 1999, this new concept of charter schools popped up, and Dayton became, believe it or not, the #1 school per
Yes.
capita for charter schools in the country. We had more charter schools than anybody else in the country. This was the center of charter school popping up, and it was a hotbed of charter schools popping up everywhere, and that took a lot of kids away from our district. And then that evolved into other things. Besides charter schools, and the State House felt that it was important to offer more choice, and so they expanded to where parents now only can go and send their kids to public schools and charter schools. And charter schools, by the way, are public schools as well. People
Yes.
don't realize that. but they can also now take vouchers. And so a parent can take a voucher from our school and send their kids to a private school if they meet certain criteria. And then the great legislature, in their wisdom, decided to add one more piece, which is open enrollment, which means, if you're a parent, you can enroll your kids during open enrollment in different school districts that are neighboring to your school district, if your school district is under certain criteria, which Dayton Public School meets. So,
Lots of choice.
It's a
Lots
lot of choice.
Okay.
And then Ohio's aging and we're losing population. So when you combine those forces that neither of us control or anybody on our board controls, it creates a perfect storm for us to lose kids every day. There was a time when I went to school in 1999. We were close to 25,000 kids, 20,000 kids at the time. Today we're at 13,000.
And can you say something about the predictions that are out into the future for us with this situation?
Sure. So
the prediction.
No, go ahead.
May I say that, and those predictions are they're kind of astounding, really, when you think about it, because they say that we'll have less and less population students in the future. So what does that say about about us at this point? We're talking about the school buildings, we're talking about access to education, but we may not have the student population. I mean, so
yeah, we're
it's a challenge. And then when you talk about funding, and we haven't talked about funding yet, but one of the issues that we face as a district is that we have to transport, charter school kids, to the various schools, and that takes away from some of our resources. Not just financially, but also, in terms of bus drivers and that kind of thing. So it's a tough situation, really, Diane.
And Diane, to give you a perfect example of this, the predictions out there were done by 3 different entities that don't belong to the same group, and they all came within 500 of each other.
Really?
And they were within 500 of where we are today.
Okay.
So their predictions are very close to being accurate. And if trend lines continue the way they have been, we will be close to 11,500 kids by 2026.
Okay.
So that shows you a gradual loss of students because of loss in population, and loss of kids to open enrollment and charters and things like that. And we are funded based on how many kids we have inside our schools. Right. And people forget that, and so those limited resources now have to be divided among all those buildings. And so when you have a building that's at 50% or less, we have to pay more to keep those buildings open because the lights are still on,
right.
and water is still on.
For all the children that are not there.
Exactly.
Right, and so and that believe it or not, our per pupil cost for some of the buildings it's higher. But then there's another issue that most people don't realize. We have 24 vacant properties right now that we're still responsible for. And that's a big financial burden for us. And we have 4 vacant buildings that we're still responsible for. And that's a big financial burden for us. This is actually a bigger financial burden for us than anything else. We're not in the business of being landlords, and we're not realtors, and we don't do a good job of selling properties either, right? I mean, we don't do any of that. So if anybody out there is listening that's interested in properties, we have 24 great locations.
You've got properties
that we can sell.
That's great.
That affects our bottom line.
Let's talk about, now that we really stated the problem, I think, hopefully clearly enough for all of our viewers, let's talk about some of the guiding principles that the board plans to use to actually grapple with these decisions. Because it is at a state where, as you're saying, you want to be making decisions in April and May, which is really right around the corner. So let's talk about some of those principles. I mean, one that was talked about, I think almost first of all, was the financial accountability.
Right.
Yes.
But I think above that, I think the number one thing for all of us is academic performance.
Okay. Yes.
It has to be. Because as we discussed, we're losing kids every day, and Mr. President knows that. Until we make sure that the academic performance, and this goes back to the original caller about equity, in every one of our schools, no matter what side of town they're on, is up to the level that they should be, and the level that our kids deserve, then we're not doing our job very well. That has to be number one. High-performing schools for every child in Dayton.
All right.
And if we do that, then I think the rest of it will solve itself.
Good. We have another call.
All right. All right.
Thank you for
Yes.
calling into our program. You're on the air, and we'd like to hear your question.
Yes, thank you.
Well-
I've learned more from this program tonight than I knew about the Dayton City Public Schools after 27 years as a Dayton resident. I have two matters that I wanted to ask about. First, I attended a couple of public events, civic meetings this past weekend, and one of the Dayton City Commissioners, who was sitting behind me at one of these events,
No names
vigorously
now, sir.
denied that
Go ahead.
Dayton is currently losing population, and commented on some of the young people that are beginning to move into downtown Dayton, especially neighborhoods around the University of Dayton.
Sure.
So that, I suppose, would have some implications for public school strategy in the future. My second question is that as a product of public schools myself, no one was more important in my life than my high school English teacher. No one. Not even my own family. And so my question has to do with teacher training, retention. How do we identify those teachers that are really making a difference in the lives of children and support them so that we send students on to college and to good careers? Thank you.
And thank you for your question. We'll get you the answer to those. All right, let's start with the popularity of downtown and near downtown areas for young people who want to be able to walk and ride bikes and
Sure.
be free of owning cars. They
Well,
may not have children now, but
Right.
maybe they
Hopefully,
will.
maybe.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that what you're seeing is an influx of young people that are energetic, that are excited about the stage they're in. We call them millennials, and hopefully they will be having children in the future that are potential Dayton Public School students. And so I think what we're really talking about is a holistic approach to Dayton. And I think as we build downtown and have events and activities and structures and places where young people can enjoy and feel comfortable and feel safe, I think that's critical
Right.
too. And so we have a great influx of young people now. There's a resurgence in housing.
Right.
That's critical. Access to transportation and entertainment and other things that young people like to do. And so when we demonstrate that as a community, as a city, then of course the next step is the classroom in our school system. I think we will benefit. So downtown is moving in the right direction, and we hope that will be a ripple effect throughout the whole city.
Right. And I think the next question was about teachers. And
Right,
how to,
the singular importance
Yes,
of maybe
yes.
one teacher that makes a difference in
Listen,
a life.
I had one teacher that made a big difference in my life. You know, my ESL teacher in high school was a big influence on me. You know, Ms. Davis to this day, and to understand the caller's question, and I understand how one teacher can change your life. And in fact, one of the things that we are discussing about as we discuss right sizing is how to make sure that we have qualified teachers in every one of our schools. So one of the issues that we're having today, because we have to keep these buildings open, is we have to hire staff to man them. But because our funding is limited, we end up with higher rates of what we call long-term substitutes. They're not full-time teachers, they're not licensed teachers, they're just long-term substitutes, which means your students are not getting the kind of education you want them to have. There's a limited resource, specialized teachers especially. It's really hard, for example, to find chemistry teachers or
Spanish
teachers or calculus teachers.
Right.
That's a very limited resource. And so if you have to spread it all over the map because you're trying to keep buildings open, rather than focusing on making sure your children are getting the right education, it creates a problem for us, and so we end up with not having the right teachers in the right buildings. And so that's one of the things, that's another guiding principle for all of us, is how do we make sure we have qualified, specialized, and great teachers in every one of our buildings. And I heard him talk about investment. We are really looking hard in making sure that we invest in our teachers for the future, that Dayton Public Schools is a competitive place when it comes to not only salaries, but a place for them to grow professionally. I think that's very important for our teachers.
Yeah, we have some recruiting opportunities in the very near future for young prospective teachers, and we're hoping, to get those creative minds and people that understand what it means to live in an urban district and to teach in that environment. I think that's so critical. And again, as Mohamed has said, we want to retain teachers, great teachers, quality teachers. I think I can recall, I'm a little older than Mohamed, but
You're not that much older
we had a little bit. When I came up, you had those teachers, man, that would stay after school 4 or 5 hours or do anything they could to help you, assist, go to your home if necessary, and say, why is Mr. Harris doing A, B, and C? And so we need that again, and it's coming. I think it's coming. So. But again, we're talking about funding, and we have to be competitive. We definitely have to be competitive with other school districts.
Yes, definitely.
To retain those teachers, those qualified teachers.
And we have really great teachers right now. It's just, we're spreading them all over the map.
We're spreading thin.
Yeah,
we are spreading thin because, we only can hire as many teachers as many students that we have, for the students that we have. And when we don't do that, it creates a quality issue for our students. And that's key for us.
Okay, very good. I'm afraid we don't have very much
time
time
I know,
left.
It's a great conversation.
It has been, but I did not want to end this interview without giving each of you a chance for some concluding remarks.
Sure.
Probably not as long as I told you could have.
it's okay.
So a
Sure.
couple of minutes, sir.
Okay.
I will let the president go first. Thank you, sir.
Well, I just want to say that it's a challenge for us as a board, as a district, as we have stated this evening about the challenges that we face. But we're excited about it. We're looking forward to doing great things for Dayton Public. We want to assure our parents and our community that our #1 priority is academic achievement. We're trying to get our students prepared for the next phase in their lives, be it college or whether they go into vocational opportunities or even just working. We want them prepared so that they can be productive students. And we're excited about the opportunities that present themselves and the new growth that I think we're going to see as a new board. We're excited about working together with the other board members, and we want to show our community a more professional and competent approach to education and to our board meetings. So we invite the community to come, and I'm doing my best to do the kind of little things, which is start on time, end on, try to do those kind of things. I think they're critical. I'm sort of a time management person.
All right, we can look forward to being on time.
Yes,
So
5 o'clock.
don't come
Meeting
late
starts
to the
5
board
o'clock.
meetings or
Yes,
you'll miss out.
that's
He's
right.
not lying. He starts
Okay.
right off 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock.
That's a good thing. All right.
Thank you for having us today. I want to say
yes.
thank you first to this program for us to talk to the public, and thank you to all of those who asked us questions today.
yes.
Thank you very much. I want to highlight a couple of things. We had National Signing Day the other day. One thing the media didn't cover very well is we actually had 7 student athletes that got signed. One went to UC, a lot of them got scholarships to different colleges.
Wonderful.
There are great things happening at Dayton Public Schools right now, and we, the media tends to cover a lot of the stuff that we're covering today. But another thing we did recently that went under radar was there is music and arts programs in every school now at DPS that wasn't there before. That's something that I wanted to highlight and make sure folks knew. As an urban school district, we come with with a set of challenges, as the president said, but that doesn't mean we don't try for our kids. And that doesn't mean that our kids are any less or that they can't do what other kids in other schools do. No, our kids actually can do much more and they can do better than those districts because they know they have to work harder. And we believe in all of them, and we believe in our parents, and we believe in our community. And so my ask of the community is come and get involved in DPS. We need your help, and we'll be willing to take it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both for
Thank
coming
you
on
so
the
much.
program. I appreciate your
you,
participation
Diane.
and your answers. I do want to thank our viewers and the public for calling in, and I want to remind people that there are many opportunities for public comment and input in the next couple of months at Dayton Public Schools. So in addition to the caller who asked about involvement, listen in or come out and take part in the changes that are happening. Thank you. Good evening.